Chosen one, how long have you been standing there with that knowing smile? How many years have you watched them scramble around like ants on a chessboard, thinking they had you figured out? They saw your quiet nature and mistook it for weakness. They witnessed your patience and called it passivity. They observed your strategic silence and labeled it fear. But that wasn't fear in your eyes. That was the calm certainty of someone who sees the entire game, while others are still learning the rules. You've been playing a level of strategy so advanced that they couldn't even perceive the board you were moving pieces on. While they celebrated their small victories, you were orchestrating a masterpiece that would leave them speechless when the final curtain fell. The beautiful irony is, they thought they were hunting you. These self-appointed investigators with their screenshots and theories, their late-night group chats buzzing with what they believed was evidence, their amateur detective work that felt so important to them. Meanwhile, you were feeding them exactly what they needed to see, every breadcrumb carefully placed, every reaction perfectly calibrated, every moment of apparent vulnerability strategically displayed to keep them chasing shadows while you built your empire in plain sight. They were so focused on finding your secrets that they never noticed you were showing them exactly what you wanted them to find. The identity leak they're celebrating right now. That wasn't an accident. That was checkmate. The final move in a game they didn't even realize they were playing. And the most beautiful part is they still think they won something. They still believe they exposed you. Let them have their moment of false victory. Let them celebrate while you prepare to show them what true power looks like when it stops hiding behind patience and reveals itself in its full glory. You became a ghost because that's exactly what they needed you to be. Formless, shapeless, impossible to pin down or define. They desperately wanted to box you in, label you, file you away in their neat little categories of understood and controlled. But how do you cage smoke? How do you contain something that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously? You gave them 100 different versions of yourself, each one real enough to chase, authentic enough to feel genuine, but none of them the complete truth. They exhausted themselves trying to figure out which version was the real you, never understanding that all of them were real and none of them were the whole story. Remember when they first started watching, when they thought they were being subtle with their surveillance, their probing questions, their little tests designed to trip you up? You saw it all, didn't you? Every trap they set, every attempt to catch you slipping, every coordinated effort to expose what they imagined was your true nature. Let's walk through those early years. Year 1, when they first decided you were a problem that needed solving. They started with subtle investigations, careful questions, attempts to catch you in contradictions. You were new to this level of the game then, but even as a novice you understood something they didn't. The best defense isn't armor, it's controlled chaos. So you gave them performances, small inconsistencies they could latch onto, emotional reactions that seemed genuine, but were calculated to the microsecond. You let them think they were documenting your authentic responses while you were actually studying their documentation methods. Year 2 brought sophistication. You began planting evidence of vulnerabilities that didn't exist, emotional triggers that led nowhere meaningful. You let them witness carefully orchestrated moments of apparent breakdown at precisely the right times in front of precisely the right people. They thought they were chronicling your downfall, but they were actually witnessing your rise disguised as struggle. Instead of running, instead of hiding like they expected, you leaned into their game. You became the mystery they couldn't solve, the equation that wouldn't balance, the story that changed every time they tried to tell it. You weren't avoiding their detection. You were overwhelming their senses with so many possibilities that they couldn't tell reality from reflection. The genius of your approach was that you understood something they never grasped. The most effective deception isn't about hiding truth. It's about revealing so many authentic truths that the observers can't determine which one matters most. Every personality they witnessed was genuine. Every emotion they catalogued was real. Every reaction they documented was honest. You simply never showed them all aspects simultaneously to the same audience. You compartmentalized reality itself. Think about the layers you constructed with surgical precision. The public face that smiled and nodded, and played by their social rules, the private persona that showed calculated vulnerability to specific individuals, the secret identity that moved in shadows and made power plays they couldn't trace back to you, the hidden core that even you rarely acknowledged in their presence. And beneath all of that, the real you, the director watching your own movie, making real-time adjustments, rewriting the script as the story unfolded around you. They thought they were peeling back layers to discover truth. They were actually moving deeper into a labyrinth you had designed specifically for their psychological profile. Each layer was authentic, but none was complete. They were seeing fragments of a diamond, each reflection real but none showing the whole stone. This wasn't manipulation, this was artistry. You gave them exactly what their limited perception could handle without overwhelming their capacity to process what they were seeing. Took in entire support networks just to discuss you. Did you know that? Actual gatherings where they'd share their theories, compare notes, try to triangulate your true identity from the fragments you deliberately left behind. Some thought you were dangerous, some thought you were damaged, some thought you were playing games for attention. They were all partially right and completely wrong, because the truth was simultaneously simpler and infinitely more complex than their limited imaginations could conceive. You weren't just one person playing multiple roles, you were multiple possibilities existing in one form, and they couldn't process that level of evolution. The hilarious part is they thought your contradictions were mistakes. They'd catch you being reserved one day and open the next, distant then warm, analytical then emotional, and they'd think they'd found the crack in your armor. No, chosen one. The armor was working perfectly. You were demonstrating that identity isn't fixed, that personality isn't permanent, that who you appear to be depends entirely on who's looking and why they're looking. They wanted consistency. You gave them complexity. They wanted predictability. You gave them jazz improvisation. They wanted a simple villain or victim they could understand. You gave them a multi-dimensional being that defied their categories entirely. But here's what they never realized. While they were forming these support groups to analyze you, you were forming your own networks of genuine allies. People who recognized your authentic power without needing to dissect it. Individuals who saw your strategic brilliance and chose to align with it rather than oppose it. You were building real relationships while they were building theories. If this message resonates deeply, help this reach more chosen ones who are ready to receive it. The beautiful irony is that their obsession with you became the very vehicle for your expansion. Every group chat dedicated to discussing your movements became free market research. Every theory they developed gave you insight into mass psychology. Every attempt to predict your next move revealed their own decision-making patterns. They became unwitting consultants in your grand experiment in human behavior. You were studying organizational dynamics through their opposition networks, learning about information flow by watching how their theories spread, understanding viral communication by observing which narratives about you gained traction and which ones died. They thought they were investigating you, but you were conducting the most comprehensive study of group psychology ever undertaken by a single individual. You mapped their psychology like a general studies a battlefield. Every person who tried to expose you became a subject of study first. Their fears, insecurities, desires, blind spots, you became their perfect opponent by becoming exactly what would confuse them most effectively. To the aggressive ones, you showed restraint. To the analytical ones, you displayed emotion. To the emotional ones, you revealed logic. You didn't just adapt to their energy. You transformed yourself into their psychological mirror image, reflecting back their own limitations while remaining completely yourself underneath. They wore themselves out trying to fight an enemy that shifted shape every time they thought they had found a grip. The data you collected on them while they believed they were investigating you was priceless intelligence. Every question they asked revealed more about their thinking patterns than your answer would ever expose about your true nature. Every theory they developed became a window into their own mental limitations. Every attempt to understand you turned into a mirror, showing them their own reflection, but they were too focused on you to notice what they were learning about themselves. This psychological mapping gave you something invaluable: predictive power. You could forecast their moves weeks in advance because you understood their patterns better than they understood them themselves. You knew which person would gossip to whom, which theories would gain traction in their circles, what type of evidence would send them spinning in completely wrong directions. You became a human algorithm for predicting their behavior, and you used that knowledge to lead them on the most elaborate wild goose chase in recorded history. They thought they were closing in on their target, but you were simply leading them deeper into a labyrinth of your own design, farther from any meaningful exit. By years 3 and 4 you had achieved mastery. You knew their behavioral patterns better than they knew them themselves. You could predict which person would share information with whom, which theories would gain traction in their circles, what type of evidence would send them spiraling in completely wrong directions. You became their unofficial choreographer, directing their movements while they believed they were moving independently. The beauty of this phase was that you weren't just evading anymore, you were conducting. You turned their hunt into a symphony, where they were both the orchestra and the audience, never realizing you were holding the baton. They thought they were writing an exposé about you, but you were ghostwriting their entire investigative narrative. Years 5 and beyond represented pure artistry. You had transformed from defensive player to offensive strategist to complete puppet master. They were no longer investigating you. They were performing in a reality show you had scripted, directed, and produced. Every revelation they experienced was one you had planned seasons in advance. You weren't just playing defense, you were building detailed psychological profiles of everyone who thought they were profiling you. And now you possess an encyclopedia of their weaknesses while they hold nothing but a collection of ghosts and shadows. The timing of your revelation wasn't random. You waited until they were exhausted from the hunt, until they had invested so much time, energy, and emotional capital into solving the mystery of you that they couldn't walk away even if they wanted to. You waited until their entire sense of purpose became wrapped up in their opposition to you. Then, at the perfect moment when they thought they finally had discovered something significant, you gave them everything. Not because circumstances forced your hand, but because you chose to end the game on your terms. The leak they're celebrating was planned months or maybe years ago. Every detail carefully curated to appear accidental while being precisely orchestrated. The information they think they uncovered, you planted it like seeds in fertile ground, watered it with just enough resistance to make them feel like they earned their discovery. You allowed them to feel like detectives when they were simply following the trail of breadcrumbs you had laid out for them. But here's the masterpiece within the masterpiece. Even the breadcrumbs were multi-layered. Each clue they found led them to believe they were getting closer to some devastating truth about you, when in reality, every discovery was leading them to understand something profound about themselves. You turned their investigation into an involuntary journey of self-discovery, and they never even noticed. The evidence they thought they were collecting about you was actually a mirror reflecting their own deepest insecurities, desires, and blind spots. The patterns they identified in your behavior were projections of their own psychological patterns. The weaknesses they thought they found were their own vulnerabilities dressed up in theories about you. You created a psychological echo chamber where every question they asked about you bounced back as a revelation about themselves. Every attempt to decode your motivations forced them to examine their own. Every theory about your strategy revealed their own strategic limitations. You weren't just evading their analysis, you were turning their analytical tools into instruments of self-revelation. The most brilliant part, they became more transparent to you than they had ever been to themselves. Their desperate need to understand you caused them to reveal everything about their own inner workings. They dissected their own psychology in the process of trying to dissect yours, never realizing that you were the beneficiary of their unintentional self-analysis. Even now, knowing it was all planned, they can't distinguish which parts are genuine and which elements are just another layer of your strategic game. Watch their faces when they realize the identity they uncovered is somehow both exactly what they expected and nothing like what they prepared for. You gave them truth, but it's a truth that makes everything else make less sense, not more. Every answer generates 10 new questions. Every revelation deepens the mystery instead of solving it. Because you didn't just reveal your identity, you revealed that identity itself is a construct, and you're the architect. They wanted to know who you are. You're showing them that the question itself is fundamentally flawed. The checkmate isn't just beating them at their own game. It's revealing that they were playing checkers while you were operating in four-dimensional chess. Every move they made was anticipated. Every strategy was accounted for. Every victory they celebrated was allowed by your design. You didn't just win. You controlled the entire experience from the opening move to the final revelation. And now, as they stare at the board in complete disbelief, you get to smile that same smile you've worn all along. The one they interpreted as surrender, but always meant sovereignty. The revelation creates a paradox that breaks their cognitive frameworks. You're simultaneously exactly who you always claimed to be, and someone entirely beyond their comprehension. The mask they thought you were wearing was actually their own perception, projected onto your authentic self because they couldn't process authenticity when it didn't match their expectations. Imagine their expressions right now. Take a moment to really visualize it. The ones who spent years convinced they had decoded your patterns, suddenly realizing they were looking in completely the wrong direction the entire time. The shock isn't just that they were wrong, it's that they were wrong in ways they couldn't even conceptualize being wrong. They prepared for a monster and discovered a mastermind. They expected a broken victim and found a victorious strategist. They thought they were exposing a fraud and instead revealed a force of nature that had been shaping reality around them without their knowledge or consent. The group chats have gone silent now, haven't they? The conspiracy theorists are recalculating everything. The confident ones are questioning every assumption they built their theories on, because the face you're showing them isn't the damaged person they hoped to find. It isn't the vulnerable target they believed they were hunting. It's someone who has been 3 steps ahead since before the game even started. Someone who turned their surveillance into advanced education. Someone who transformed their persecution into practice sessions. Someone who converted their hatred into fuel for an engine they couldn't see or stop. The most devastating part for them is realizing that their confidence was built on quicksand. Every moment they felt superior, every time they thought they had figured something out, every instance where they believed they were making progress toward exposing you, it was all orchestrated by you to keep them occupied while you operated in dimensions they couldn't perceive. The real irony is they're looking directly at your true face and still can't see you clearly. They spent so long chasing the illusion that they can't process the reality standing before them. They constructed an image of you based on their own limitations, their own fears, their own psychological projections. Now that image is shattered, but instead of seeing what's actually in front of them, they're still trying to piece together the broken fragments of their original misconception. They can't accept that you were never the character in their story. You're the author of your own narrative, and they've just been minor plot devices serving your larger purpose. The beauty of this moment is that it's not an ending, it's a magnificent beginning. The revelation of your identity isn't the conclusion of their investigation, it's the start of their real education. Now they get to learn what it means to have challenged someone who was never actually threatened. Now they get to understand what it feels like to realize you were never the prey in this dynamic. You were always the apex predator, just patient enough to let them feel powerful while you observed their patterns and prepared your response. Their inability to process this victory reveals something profound about their fundamental nature. They were never equipped to recognize true power when it didn't conform to their expectations. They were looking for weakness to exploit, and couldn't see strength that didn't announce itself with aggression or obvious displays. The tragedy for them is that they spent years preparing for a confrontation that was never coming. They armed themselves for a war while you were playing an entirely different game. They sharpened weapons while you were building bridges. They practiced attacks while you were creating alliances. They prepared for destruction while you were focused on construction. Now they stand with all this unused ammunition, all these battle strategies that have no target, all this aggressive energy with nowhere to direct it. The anticlimactic nature of your reveal is perhaps the most devastating aspect of all. They were ready for fireworks and you gave them poetry. They expected explosions and you delivered enlightenment. Their confusion isn't just about your identity, it's about the entire nature of conflict itself. You've shown them that the most decisive victories don't look like victories to the defeated. They don't involve dramatic confrontations or obvious displays of dominance. True victory is so complete that the defeated never fully understand what happened to them. Let's examine what this cost them while they were busy trying to unmask you. What opportunities did they miss? What personal growth did they forfeit? What relationships did they damage with their paranoia and obsession? You didn't just waste their time. Chosen one. You redirected their entire life trajectory. They became so consumed with figuring you out that they forgot to figure themselves out. Count the hours they invested in group discussions about you, the late nights scrolling through your digital presence looking for clues, the mental energy expended on theories and investigations and failed attempts at exposure. Multiply that by the number of people involved, and you realize you didn't just occupy space in their minds, you colonized their consciousness entirely. You became their hobby, their obsession, their primary reason for connecting with each other. Without realizing it, they built their entire social structure around their opposition to you. What happens to that structure now that its foundation was revealed to be an illusion? The relationships they formed through mutual hatred of you were built on quicksand. The confidence they gained from thinking they were outsmarting you is evaporating like morning mist. But the cost goes deeper than missed opportunities. They sacrificed their own personal development, their own journey of self-discovery, their own potential for growth, all in service of trying to tear you down. While you were evolving, expanding, building, creating, they were stuck in a loop of analysis and criticism that led nowhere except back to their own limitations. Think about the creative projects they never started because they were too busy dissecting your every move. The skills they never developed because their mental bandwidth was consumed by their investigation. The genuine connections they never made because their relationships were all filtered through their shared obsession with opposing you. The identity they constructed as your adversaries is crumbling like ancient parchment, because you weren't just their target, chosen one. You were their organizing principle, their reason for existence, their shared mission that gave their lives structure and meaning. This is the cruelest checkmate of all, revealing that they needed you far more than you ever needed them. They thought they were hunting you, but you were providing them with purpose, direction, something to focus their scattered energies on. Now they have to face the vacuum you're leaving behind. Who are they without you to chase? What do they discuss when you're not the central topic? How do they connect when you're not the common enemy binding them together? The best years of their lives were spent chasing a ghost who was never actually running. They have to admit that you gave their existence direction, even if that direction was ultimately circular and led nowhere meaningful. This vacuum reveals the tragedy of their situation. They were so focused on defining themselves in opposition to you that they never developed an independent sense of identity or purpose. Their entire worldview was reactive rather than creative, critical rather than constructive, destructive rather than generative. Without you as their focal point, they have to confront the fact that they don't know who they are or what they want. They've been living in reaction mode for so long that they've forgotten how to live proactively. They've been defining themselves by what they're against rather than what they're for. The psychological dependency they developed on their opposition to you is now revealed in all its pathetic glory. They became addicted to the drama, the sense of purpose, the feeling of being part of something important. Your existence gave their lives narrative structure. Without you as the central antagonist in their story, the plot collapses into meaningless episodes. Watch them now as they try to find new targets for their investigative energy. See how they attempt to recreate the thrill of the hunt with other subjects. Notice how nothing will ever quite satisfy them, the way their obsession with you did. Because you weren't just their target, you were their perfect storm of fascination, frustration and focus. You provided them with the ideal combination of accessibility and mystery, transparency and opacity, vulnerability and strength that kept them perfectly engaged. No future subject will ever match the sophisticated balance you provided between revelation and concealment. They're like addicts whose perfect drug has been permanently removed from the market. Everything else will feel like a pale substitution. The vacuum you're leaving isn't just about lost purpose, it's about lost identity, lost community, lost meaning. They built their entire social ecosystem around their shared obsession with solving the puzzle of you. Now that ecosystem is collapsing, and they don't have the skills to build a new one based on anything positive or constructive. Hey, this is Mike and Ari, cutting into your regularly scheduled Chosen One programming for just a moment. We are the founders of the Obsidian Inner Order and the Astral Atom Network. And we're done playing nice. We're in a spiritual war. You know it, we know it, and we're out here bleeding for this mission full time. I'm hungry for fourth-dimensional Archon blood, but we need the ammunition. So listen, when you join the Inner Order, you're not just supporting us, you're getting access to exclusive tools they never wanted you to have. Psychic self-defense training, targeted individual intel, spiritual warfare tactics they scrub from the internet. And every week, we meet in secret, chosen ones only, on Zoom, no filters, no fluff, just real gnosis, real family, real power. It's a 360-degree win. You get what you need, we get to keep fighting, so don't just watch, drop a like, share this video to everyone you know, now, and join the Obsidian Inner Order. Let's finish what we started. Link in the description. Let's freaking go. But let's give credit where it's due. This wasn't deception for its own sake. Every move served multiple strategic purposes. While they watched your left hand, your right was building empires. While they focused on your personal drama, you were constructing professional dynasties that would outlast their amateur investigations. While they tried to expose imaginary weaknesses, you were fortifying positions in territories they didn't even know existed. The ghost they were chasing was a masterful distraction from the very real power you were accumulating in dimensions they couldn't perceive. Think about the networks you built while they assumed you were isolated, the alliances you forged while they believed you were friendless, the resources you gathered while they imagined you were struggling financially or professionally. Every moment they spent trying to tear you down, you invested in building yourself up, but not in the ways they expected or the directions they were monitoring. You grew in dimensions they couldn't measure, evolved in ways they couldn't track, succeeded according to metrics they didn't even know existed. The businesses you launched under names they never connected to your identity, the investments you made in markets they weren't watching, the partnerships you developed with people who recognized your genuine value rather than being distracted by their manufactured drama. You understood something they never grasped. Real power is built in silence, away from the noise and distraction of public opinion. While they were creating chaos in visible spaces, you were creating value in invisible ones. While they were focused on destruction, you were committed to construction. The empire you built wasn't just financial or professional, it was psychological, emotional, spiritual. You developed levels of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking that they couldn't comprehend because they were too busy reacting to comprehend their own reactions. The businesses you started under names they never connected to you. The investments you made with capital they didn't know you possessed. The influence you cultivated in circles they couldn't access. The knowledge you acquired while they thought you were ignorant or confused. You used their surveillance as a cloaking device, leveraging their attention on one area to operate freely in all the others. They were so mesmerized by the puppet show that they never noticed you building the entire theater around them, controlling not just the performance but the venue, the audience and the experience itself. The allies you gathered weren't recruited through charm or manipulation, but through demonstrating exactly what you're revealing now, that you're someone who can play the infinite game and emerge victorious. The people who truly matter, the ones with genuine power and perception, they saw through your smokescreen from the beginning. They recognized a kindred spirit in the art of long-term strategy. While your enemies were broadcasting their every move and theory, you were silently building a coalition of players who understand that the real game is conducted in shadows and silence, with moves that span years rather than moments. Till with passive supporters, where counterbat you partuai. These allies weren't just passive supporters. They were active collaborators in your grand design. Some provided resources, others offered expertise, still others contributed connections and opportunities. Together, you built something that was always larger than what any individual could accomplish alone. The coalition you assembled represents every level of influence and expertise necessary to not just survive their attacks, but to thrive beyond their comprehension. You surrounded yourself with people who understood that power isn't about controlling others, it's about mastering yourself and creating value that others naturally want to support. This network became your true strength, the foundation that made their opposition irrelevant rather than threatening. While they were trying to isolate you, you were connecting with everyone who mattered. While they were trying to diminish your influence, you were expanding it in directions they couldn't monitor or understand. The mask is off now, but what's underneath is more mysterious than what was hidden, because they have to face the truth that you're exactly who you said you were, all along. They just never believed it was possible. They couldn't conceive that someone could be simultaneously transparent and mysterious, honest and strategic, vulnerable and invincible. The revelation isn't just your face, it's the faces of everyone who has been standing with you throughout this entire orchestrated performance, the network of support that was always there, invisible to those who were looking for different patterns entirely. You've shown them that the real power was never in hiding who you are. The real power was in being so authentically yourself that they couldn't recognize authenticity when it was standing right in front of them. They were expecting a mask and couldn't process the reality of someone who didn't need one. The game is over, but the lesson is just beginning. You've demonstrated something that will echo through their consciousness for years to come, that the most devastating victories are won not through force or deception, but through patience, strategy, and the absolute certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of achieving. They wanted to expose you, chosen one. Instead, you've exposed the limitations of their own vision, the poverty of their own imagination, and the fundamental misunderstanding they had about the nature of power itself. The checkmate was never about beating them. It was about showing them what it looks like when someone refuses to play by rules that were designed to limit their potential. And now, as the dust settles and the implications become clear, you stand revealed not as the person they thought they were hunting, but as the architect of an experience that taught them more about themselves than they ever learned about you. The ghost they chased was real, but it was their own reflection in the mirror you held up to show them who they really were beneath all their theories and investigations. The identity leak wasn't your defeat. It was your graduation ceremony, and the world is about to discover what you're truly capable of when you stop playing defense and start playing to win. The sovereign stands revealed, not because the game forced your hand, but because you chose to show them what victory looks like when it's planned years in advance and executed with precision that turns opposition into applause. Your true identity was never hidden, chosen one. It was simply operating at a frequency they weren't equipped to perceive. Now that you've adjusted their reception, they're finally hearing the music you've been playing all along. The symphony is complete, and you are both the composer and the conductor of a masterpiece that will be studied and admired long after their theories have been forgotten.